Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Overcoming EV Charging Barriers in Apartment Buildings. I'm Rachel Doran. I'll be the moderator today. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Strategy at Clean Energy Canada. If you don't know us, we're a think tank at the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, BC, and we're located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Now, we just last week released our new report, Electifying the Lot. And this report really dug into the issue of, the importance of charging at home and a real gap that we're seeing emerging around, how this is going to be possible for the next wave of people who really want to be driving EVs. So Electrifying the Lot found that installing EV charging in apartment buildings offers a host of benefits for drivers, utilities, and city planners alike. But as a recent CEC survey found, younger Canadians are both more inclined to go electric, but also more likely to live in apartments. So costs, electrical infrastructure, regulations can all pose barriers to charging in these buildings. Thankfully, though, these can be overcome with good policies, and that's why we have an incredible panel with us today to dig deeper into the problem, but also the solutions. So I know folks are probably just still getting connected, so I'll do a few housekeeping pieces before kind of leading into the substance today. So on the back end, we have my incredible colleague, Kira Torrance. If you have technical questions, just ask them through the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll be welcoming your questions at any time during the presentation. So if you have questions, please just drop them in via the Q&A function. So if you see at the bottom of your screen a little icon with a question mark, that's the Q&A function. Pop a question in any time, either to the whole panel or an individual person. We'll be welcoming and I'll be posing those questions to our panel in the final 30 minutes or so of this presentation. You'll be muted, however, throughout. So please do, ask a question anytime. Now, finally, we'll be circulating a recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides to everyone who registered. Feel free to share them widely. We'll also include a link to Clean Energy Canada's absolutely awesome weekly newsletter. If you are not already signed up, it goes out on Mondays and provides a great overview of the energy transition for the week. So turning back to the topic at hand, as Canada embarks on a generational housing build-out, now is the time to support EV charging in apartments and condos. Young families are keen to go electric, but many aren't able to benefit at home from one of the biggest perks of doing so. So today we're going to hear from an incredible panel with different perspectives on this issue. Their cameras are not on yet, but when I introduce the panel later on, they will turn their screens on. So Leslie Ng is a Senior Sustainability Specialist with the City of Vancouver. Marie-Pier Corbeil is a VP and co-founder of RVE. Trevor McLeod, Sustainability Manager at Hazelview Properties, and CEC's own Joanna Kyriazis, who's the Director of Public Affairs. So I'm going to start by asking Joanna to turn on her screen. She's going to kick us off with a short presentation on our report, Electrifying the Lot, and then I'm going to give a more fulsome introduction to our amazing panelists and turn it on to a broad discussion. So over to you, Joanna.
Thanks, Rachel. All right. So Kira, let's just jump right to the next slide. As Rachel mentioned, last week, Clean Energy Canada released a report called Electrifying the Lot. And this report provided an overview of kind of the state of EV charging in multi-unit residential buildings in Canada. Now, we know that EVs are increasingly popular among Canadians, but some Canadians still face barriers. Higher sticker prices are one of the key barriers, but the other one is access to home charging. Whether or not a driver has access to home charging is going to be a determining factor of whether or not that person's willing to go electric. So again, as Canada is looking to build out some 4 million new homes in the next decade, we want to be making sure that homes of all types, including condos and apartment buildings, are equipped with EV charging to ensure that all Canadians can go electric regardless of their housing situation. The report got a lot of interest from the media, which tells us that this is an issue that's definitely resonating with Canadians. Go to the next slide, please. So for the purposes of our report, we wrote this report to be accessible to everyday Canadians. It's sort of a layperson audience. So we ended up choosing the term apartment buildings instead of multi-unit residential buildings because not everybody knows what a MURB is. But just to help or to kind of define that term up front, by apartment building, we meant a wide variety of multi-unit dwellings, including rental buildings and condo buildings where people own their units. Our definition did not include townhomes, just to ensure, data comparability and whatnot. But of course, townhomes are also in need of home charging solutions as well. Next slide, please. So the issue that our report aimed to elevate was this idea that access to home charging is really important when we're trying to support Canadians in going electric. Charging at home is both the cheapest and the most convenient option. With over a third of Canadians living in apartment buildings, and that number being even higher in urban centers like Toronto and Vancouver, we need to make sure that we are offering solutions so that everybody can charge easily at home. Now, at the present time, the majority of EV drivers in Canada are people who live in detached homes. They have easy access to an electrical outlet. They have more control over whether or not they can go in and install a charging station if they want one. And that's something that we think governments should be focused on addressing. Next slide, please. And as Rachel mentioned, this is an issue that disproportionately impacts younger Canadians. So let's think about millennials and Gen Z Canadians under the age of 30. They are more likely to be living in an apartment building than a single family home at that age. They're also more likely to rent. On the flip side, or on the other hand, this group of Canadians are the most keen to go electric and the most inclined to buy an EV for their next vehicle. So there's a disconnect there, and we need to be making sure we are advancing solutions so that younger Canadians aren't locked out of the energy transition and the huge cost-saving benefits that EVs provide. Go to the next slide, please. So there are two kind of broad buckets of policy solutions that we've seen advanced in different jurisdictions, both in Canada and abroad. The first bucket is a focus on new homes. So when we are constructing new condos and apartment buildings, we can be taking steps to ensure that those are EV ready from the start. Either they have charging stations installed or they're equipped with the right electrical wiring and electrical capacity to add EV charging stations easily at a later date. And then the second broad bucket of policy solutions refers to the types of supports we can provide existing apartment and condo buildings to retrofit and add charging stations later. Okay. So in terms of that first bucket on new builds, this is really where government should be placing a priority focus. Again, Canada right now is talking a lot about embarking on this massive housing build out across the country. And we need to be making sure we're building those condos and apartments right from the start, ensuring that the people who are eventually going to be living there have the option of charging at home and going electric. This is the more cost-effective route because multiple studies have shown it is 3 to 4 times cheaper to make a building EV ready from the start than to have to go and retrofit that building after the fact. Adding EV readiness requirements can be achieved through policy at various levels of government. So federal and provincial governments can update their building codes, and municipalities can incorporate these requirements into their bylaws. And we actually have already seen a number of municipalities, especially in BC, putting forward these types of requirements for new builds. Next slide, please. Here is a map from our report, which shows how many municipalities in each province have advanced EV readiness requirements in their municipal bylaws or green building standards. And there's a bit of a relationship here where we can see, in BC and Quebec, the levels of EV uptake are the highest, and also the prevalence of these types of requirements at the municipal level are also the highest. But what we argue in the report is a piecemeal approach led by municipalities isn't the best option. It's not the best for developers, who are then put in a position where they have to comply with a patchwork of different policies. It's not the best for municipalities or even residents who are looking to purchase or rent a home in different municipalities. They kind of want to understand what they're going to get. So we'd love to see more leadership at the federal and provincial levels. Now, in that second bucket of measures, that relates to existing buildings, and there are really two main policy approaches that that governments can advance. So the first is right to charge legislation, which makes it easier for a condo owner to get strata or condo board approval to go and install a charging station at his or her own cost. And then another option is governments at the municipal level and in various provinces across the country can also offer support to help building owners and managers install charging stations in existing buildings. The federal government also has a program called the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program that offers this type of support. Okay, so I'll leave it there for now. Happy to dive into these policy options in more detail as part of the moderated discussion.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joanna. I will actually ask our panelists to turn their cameras on now. And as they do so, I'll give a little more of a fulsome introduction. So Leslie Ng is joining us as a senior sustainability specialist with the City of Vancouver. She currently leads the city's electric vehicle strategy as part of the city's climate emergency action plan. Thanks so much for joining us, Leslie. Marie-Pier Corbeil, VP and co-founder of RVE, a Canadian company focused on simplifying home charging. So excited to hear about your perspective on this, Marie-Pier. And finally, Trevor, a sustainability manager at Hazelview Properties, a company dedicated to creating new purpose-built rental communities and transforming vintage rental buildings into sustainable spaces. So really excited to get your perspective on new and existing buildings, Trevor. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining us, and Joanna as well. So I have a few pre-prepared questions. I will be opening the floor. I see questions coming in already, so that's great. Please do continue to drop them in over the course of the next couple of minutes. To kick things off, though, I have a pretty general question to put to everyone. The world is pretty busy right now. It's amazing to see the interest in this issue, but I'd love to know from your perspective, why does paying attention to this problem matter? And in the end, what is this going to mean for EV uptake? And maybe as we saw in the presentation, Leslie, obviously there's some leadership in BC on this issue and some interest in Metro Vancouver. Maybe I'll turn to you first for your perspective.
Sure, yeah. I know the world is really busy right now. But I'd say, as we tackle the largest source of emissions from transportation, it's important we continue to move towards clean transportation. And one of the, easiest and cheapest ways, as Joanna already mentioned, to support that transition is to have those EV-ready policies in place. That will enable future access for residents, and it's just so much cheaper to install it right during that new construction period. So that's, I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks. So Trevor, you're joining us, EVs, I don't think, are your day-to-day business. You're really thinking about, you know, buildings and rental buildings. Like, why is this issue so critical for you? And if you want to tell us a bit more about Hazelview, great as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Rachel. I would say, I mean, to give you a high-level overview for Hazelview Properties, we're a Canadian multi-unit residential building provider across Canada. So we've got about 23,000 units across the country and about 200 buildings. So we're in pretty much all of the major markets where EVs are seeing some really good uptake outside of BC, unfortunately. So I don't get to work with Leslie much. But for Hazelview, I'd say the reason kind of why it matters to us is because it really matters to our residents. They're coming to us either in the initial kind of leasing stage of the process as like new customers and new residents to Hazelview, but also on the existing resident front. So they're asking for this to be an amenity and a feature of where they live because they're either wanting to make the switch to EVs or maybe they already have. So if we are kind of wanting to be that future-proof housing provider and attract that segment of the rental housing market, we have to kind of align and be, you know, not a laggard and say, hey, you know what, we're wanting to attract that kind of clientele. And I think in 2025, we can pretty much say that this is a segment that's only going to grow. I think we're pretty comfortable to say that electric vehicles are here to stay. I think last I heard, there's 60 plus models of EVs in Canada now. So it's not like there's a dearth of selection. I think we've got a lot to go from now. So with that just becomes higher uptake. So you're going to see a lot more people asking for it just because it's in the marketplace.
Thanks so much. And Marie-Pier, I think this is your bread and butter. Why does this issue matter?
Yes, so RV is celebrating his 10th year anniversary this year, and what we noticed over time, having a mission to just simplify home charging, was the proportion of problem in MURB compared to single family home is really impressive. So by tackling all the little problems that are out there that prevents people from having a charger when they live in multi-unit residential building, will allow us just to bring equity. And ultimately, what we all want is faster EV adoption. And until we address all of these problems and we coordinate all the stakeholders in order to fix all of them, it won't be, we won't be able to see that kind of equity. So we're aiming, we're looking forward to help and collaborate on fixing those issues.
Finally, Joanna, you want to tell us a little bit about your perspective?
Sure. So I think this is important for two reasons. First, it relates to high cost of living. Canadians are really struggling with their monthly bills, and driving an EV is one of the best ways to save Canadian families money. We calculated that gas prices would have to drop as low as 40 cents per liter to compete with how cheap it is to charge an EV. And I think, you know, many of us know that, but as I said before, you know, access to home charging is one of the key barriers to be able to unlock those cost savings. And now governments have been focusing on rebate programs to help with the purchase of the vehicle, but they're increasingly looking for more cost-effective ways to support the EV transition and break down these barriers. Adding EV readiness requirements to building codes is a no-cost solution, right? No cost to government, no cost to taxpayers. And it's one of the most important moves that governments can make to help with those costs of living. Second, and I'll be quick, is just, you know, what's on everybody's mind right now is the trade and tariff wars, and our auto industry is getting hit by those. One of the best ways that Canadian governments can continue to support our burgeoning EV industry is to put forward measures that continue to grow demand for those EVs and batteries that, you know, Canada wants to be making. And so again, this is another demand side measure that helps the market for EVs to keep going strong here in Canada at a time when the industry is in need of some extra support.
Thanks, everyone. Marie-Pierre, turning back to you for a minute. So you've been working on the ground. What have RV found to be the biggest obstacles to charging installation? And how are you working with condo owners or developers to address these?
Yeah, so I'd say that we've noticed that the biggest obstacle change over time as the market evolve. And also what's really interesting about MERB is like we kind of have four categories. So we have those new building, those retrofit building, and they can either be condo or rental apartment building. So there's like really like, and all those boxes have those their challenges. So and as EV like get more and more adapt, we kind of saw evolution in all those bugs. But like I'll say that the most like the one that we addressed first was that we've noticed was my co-founder and brother used to be an electrician with for my family business, and they start installing EV charger back in 2012 when the first EV came on the road in Quebec. And you had those people lived in penthouse that wanted a charger in their parking, but it was just not possible due to the lack of electrical capacity. So that's why we developed like the first energy management system for EV, especially designed for MERB, because it was like really a problem. So we did this. We're like, great, problem solved. No, not solved, because in order for the technology to be implemented, there is a decision-making process. So then the second issues that we've noticed was the absence of guidance and support for condo board during both the decision-making process and the installation phase. So that's why after that, we created a support service to guide condo board through this process, because there's a lot of information to make sense of in order to take the right decision. So then we're like, we're good. I think we fix it all. No, we then notice that in order to make the right decision, a decision maker needs to make sure that he's taking the right decision and there's no bias. So there needs to be information available in order for him to make like comparison and say, okay, that's really the right option. So we developed the online platform, which is called Merbly, which is an online platform dedicated to EV charging in MERBs for residential building. So then we're like, all good. I think we've covered it all. No. So we've noticed that in order to have all of this happen, we need the help of, as your report mentioned, both like municipalities, the provincial government, and like both grant, and then there's the electrical code, and there's also electrical standard. So like I would say that in the last year, we've kind of play a big role in putting at the same table different stakeholder, because everybody's interested on MERB, but you all have like one or two individual in different organization. So because our business really focus on home charging and MERB is a big part of it, we kind of know all those golden people that are interested in MERB, and we make sure that we can put them around the table in order to have the right conversation we need to make things move forward. So that's like where I like all the issues that we've noticed over time, how we kind of address them, and where I'd say that we are right now, like the biggest issues. And I think that your report is like right on where we're at for this topic.
Thanks, Marie-Pierre. Trevor, maybe over to you. You alluded to this in your intro, kind of some of the benefits that you're seeing around the installation of EV charging. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more? Like, why has Hazelview invested in this? And are you, if you have any stories to share around the benefits you've seen for property owners or developers?
Yeah, certainly. So a big reason why we've invested EV charging in Hazelview developments, both like net new developments that we're constructing as new developments, but also like our existing standing assets. Especially, I would say for the new developments, and you alluded to it in your Electifying the Lot report is, that's when it's easiest and cheapest to do so from both a physical charger standpoint, but also like main electrical building infrastructure standpoint. So if you're buying or you're building a new electrical panel and, distribution equipment from your electricity provider, that cost delta to basically upsize it to say, okay, I want to have minimum 25% of all parking spaces outfitted with level 2 charging on day one. That's the time to do it, not, a year or two down the line where you're like, oh, I wish we, could have gone back to the blueprint stage and, paid an extra maybe $30,000 instead of $100,000 to make that change at that point. So that would be kind of like the new development side of things. But for our standing assets, I would say for those investments, we're making those investments because we want to attract that type of resident makeup, because we have found through resident surveys and just our own anecdotes that someone that buys an EV is more likely to be kind of that good steward that we're looking to attract from a sustainability lens. So that person is, more often than not going to be more attuned to their energy consumption, to their water consumption, right? Because they're in their head to say, okay, my batteries, it's only got maybe 50% charge, I've got to conserve, right? So they're more likely to do that type of behavior in the house and in a Hazelview property, ideally. So it just makes our lives easier to have more of those kind of residents in our buildings, because they're already thinking that way. They're already thinking with kind of that environmental lens, which is huge. So
Great. Leslie, my question for you is it's a big one. So, the City of Vancouver is a leading municipality on EV charging solutions. So can you tell a little bit to others about what policies you've put in place and what have you learned?
Yeah, for sure. So the City of Vancouver, we've had EV ready policy since I think around 2009, and since 2018 we've required 100% EV readiness in our residential stalls and 45% EV readiness in non-residential stalls, and then 100% of car share stalls to also include that EV charger. So we've been implementing these EV ready policies for a while now, and a recent study we completed that forecasted the demand for EV charging infrastructure based on the federal and provincial sales targets really showed that, there's a huge demand for charging infrastructure to be able to support that kind of market uptake. And when we looked at the supply, that the gap in that demand and supply, we found that there's the biggest reason for us to be able to actually have a more manageable gap was because we had these EV ready policies in place that could enable those who wanted access to charging in the future to get access to that charging. So it really is a really key policy that I think is important to enable people to have access to charging and for us to be able to reduce that gap and demand for charging in the future. Of course, that's really only addresses our new construction. So for a lot of the existing buildings, it's a challenge. And, we have found that it's important for people to understand all of the different components and involved in making that decision, and how to retrofit, how to access the rebates that might be available. So as Marie mentioned, like having a program that helps people navigate that process is really important. So we've been investing in retrofit programs to support building owners to access that information and access also some funding to be able to retrofit their buildings. And we're moving towards aligning it with some of our other green building policy retrofit programs so that a building can make all of their decisions around building electrification kind of in one stop sort of thing, and have support to guide them through all of that decision-making process. So yeah, I think those are the main pieces that we've been working on to help address that access to charging. And it's yeah, I can't just stress enough just that the EV ready policies have really helped to minimize that gap in demand that we would see in the future.
Thanks, Leslie. And I had some more prepared questions, but you know what? The chat, the Q&A is so active. I'm going to start turning to some of the questions posed by audience. So Joanna, I'm going to start with you on this one, but I bet other folks will have a perspective on this too. One of the questions, it's been very lively in the chat around level 1 versus level 2. And so, you know, when is level 1 the right solution? Why did our report focus on level 2? So maybe I'd turn back to you, Joanna, first on that. And then I'd love to know, Trevor, someone asked if Hazelview is doing level 1 or level 2. Marie-Pier, maybe that factors into some of the solutions you're looking at too. So Joanna, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is definitely a discussion that we had a lot internally and continue to have. So I do think that level 1 is an adequate charging solution for a large swath of Canadians. Studies have shown that anecdotally, even at Clean Energy Canada, a lot of us just rely on level 1. I only rely on level 1 from all of my charging needs at home. But I guess a couple of factors went into how we approached the report. Number one, when it comes to new builds, our understanding is that it's actually the cheapest option to go with level 2 and energy management systems or load management systems. And so then you're offering charging solutions that are going to meet everyone's needs, and it's cost effective. When it comes to retrofits, we agree that level 1 could be the right move in a lot of circumstances because it's a low-hanging fruit. It's affordable. It requires less kind of electrical upgrades, but I think we just wanted to say when it comes to retrofits, could be either level 1 or level 2. I know there's a lot of discussions and standardization and definitions that are being, workshopped right now in Canada, including at the CSA group and as part of the Canadian Electrical Code. So we were trying to align with that in our report, which I do think focuses a little bit more on level 2. I'd love to hear other people's perspective on the panel, though.
Yeah, does anyone else want to throw in on this one?
Oh, go ahead, Trevor.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Joanna, I think you mentioned you suffice with level 1 for your own EV. I don't have an EV as the sustainability manager. I hear about that a lot, but I think I would be able to get by with level 2 or level 1, sorry, for most of my own personal requirements. But for Hazelview, we've only ever done level 2 charging in both our new developments and retrofit applications. That's not to say that we wouldn't look at level 1 charging as an option, especially for some of our older assets. I mean, some of our oldest assets, they were built in 1922 in Toronto. So electric vehicle charging was not on any sort of time horizon, unfortunately. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation, depending on the building, because would you rather have, slow level 1 charging or no charging at all, right? So for those situations, I think some charging is better than no charging. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Even if it's just to, do a top up, maybe you're visiting a friend for an hour or two or whatever the case may be. I think it's that, some is better than none at all. So there will be different applications for different properties. I mean, some of our properties, one in Midtown Toronto right now, we're doing a full building decarbonization project on that. And as part of the kind of electrical upgrade that we needed to complete for that property, we said, okay, if we're switching everything over to heat pumps, let's make sure we have enough capacity for 100% of the parking garage to be level 2 EV charger kind of ready to go, because again, doing it in the design phase is the cheapest option to go with. And you know what, 5-10 years down the line, we'll be so happy we did that, because we can just budget for 5 to 10% of the parking spots charging station kind of allocation and have them installed. And you're not saying, okay, you know what, this sub panel needs to be replaced. That's $30,000. And that's where you just get a little bit of pushback on, okay, maybe it's a capital cost piece that's too expensive. And that can kind of erode some of the excitement for EV charging.
On my end, so like due to the electrical capacity constraint, yes, there's often both, like, do we go with level 1 or with level 2 and energy management system? And I know that in some discussion, people were afraid that some building would go with level 1 and do energy management, which ends with a very, very, very slow charging. As when you go with level 2, you can beneficiate from the diversity. So because you are sharing power among many people, you kind of like split the power altogether. And like the most important is at the end of the day, like we want to make sure that everybody gets their charging. As when you go with level 1, you have, like for in Quebec, for example, right now it's 20 amp. So you have 20 amp for one person, even if this person does not need charging. But when you go with level 2, this 20 amp can go to someone else who can get charging. So I know that it was like part of the discussion of like what's more efficient for a building to go with, considering that we at the source have limited power.
Thanks, everyone. I think another kind of chat conversation topic in the chat, Leslie, I'm going to turn to you on this one. You know, given that we do have a lot of buildings standing now that will be hard to retrofit in some cases, what role do neighborhood or community EV charging hubs play in enabling access to charging? So I'm not sure if that's something the City of Vancouver's done, and if not, we can try to kick that question to someone else too.
Neighborhood charging hubs, like just the public charging network, basically. Is that what kind of is meant by that? I mean, yeah, for sure. Without the retrofits of building, like most people want to charge at home, but if they're not able to, they're going to have to rely on the public charging network. So for sure, the demand on that public charging network and would be a lot higher, and we found that too in the study that we did, which is why, you know, one of the major strategies that we'd want to pursue is expanding retrofit programs for these apartment buildings. At the end of the day, people would prefer to charge at home, right? So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Maybe turning a little bit now to utilities and the grid and how this issue interacts with energy supply in general. So there's maybe a few different topics coming up in the grid here. One of them is really around like most people who charge their EV at home at night would charge their EV at home at night. What kind of electrical infrastructure would be required to ensure that all high-rise buildings have this capacity? Does Canada have access to all the infrastructure that would be required? Like, are we talking just about chargers, or what are the implications on the grid? So I'd be interested, maybe Marie-Pier, on your perspective on this, and then might turn it to Joanna a little bit to give a bit of a CEC overview too.
Yeah, so maybe let's start with like what is a electric vehicle energy management system. It has 3 main components. It monitors things, it analyzes the data, and it controls the load for the charging. And it can be like one component or many component, but in the question that you're asking, I think that it's really important that all system monitors both physical components that are in the building and also the grid's need, which can depend a lot on the jurisdiction. So I think like that is, and then like this monitoring system can be in many places, and it can be like physical, it can be in the cloud or whatever. Same thing with the analysis. Some inner EVMS, that's called with the acronym. So some EVMS analysis system are locally, others are in the cloud, but we need to make sure that they like gets the data from, okay, what are the utility needs, and they can send the signal to control, and then the control can be made at the source with for example, a demand charge controller, it can be a smart panel, or it can be at the charger. So these are like the controlling device. But like the main element, so no matter the kind of system you put in place, if it monitors what the utility needs, I think that the system is compatible, and yeah, it's all in harmony.
Thanks, Marie-Pier. Joanna, sort of same question to you, but one tilt here. One audience member was asking, why is CEC not recommending rooftop and battery pairing along with EV charging in every building? Many options are already in use in California and elsewhere in the world. When you kind of give your answer about grid impacts, could you talk a little bit about the potential of electric vehicle charging to be a distributed energy resource and to pair in with some of these other energy solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first of all, I think that the impact on the grid that EVs is going to have is a little bit overinflated in people's minds. When we look at numbers from British Columbia, California, and even the federal government, by 2030, EVs are going to account for between like 2 and 5% of electricity demand in those jurisdictions. And that's at a time when we're expecting EVs to make up 68% of new sales in California, 90% of new sales in BC. And so like it's not going to be as hard on the grid as we think, in particular because we have these energy management systems, and often EVs are being charged at night when in many jurisdictions there's an oversupply of electricity. So A, it's not as bad as you think. B, I think part of the beauty of having some of these EV readiness requirements and some of these other EV sales requirements is that it offers predictability to the market. So electric utilities can know what's coming and they can start to plan and invest accordingly. I also wanted to point to NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, did put out a study last year that assesses Canada's charging needs and looks at impacts on the grid. So I don't have all of the dollar figures or kilowatt hour numbers off the top of my head, but I can plop that a link to that report in the chat for anyone who wants to do a deeper dive. On the distributed energy resources side, so yeah, I think as we're looking for ways to keep electricity prices low and avoid massive grid infrastructure upgrades, using distributed energy resources like EV charging or heat pumps that are being deployed in homes across the country, that is going to be an answer for us. Where this isn't my area of expertise, but if, for instance, I signed up with my electric utility provider where I have an EV and I've given them permission to ask me if they can pause my charging for a minute at a time of peak demand so that they can resend electricity elsewhere. So I think a lot of that is going to be happening more, and having a bunch of EV charging stations and electric vehicle batteries out there is also going to provide a good resiliency solution for our grid if we did need to be storing electrical capacity for use at another time.
I have something to add on this.
Sure.
Like in terms of MERB, we all know how to get electricity to EVs and their batteries, but to take electricity and put it out back on the grid is another challenge. So in MERBs, we need to think that a lot of component, and probably Trevor knows it, are part of like the building's electrical infrastructure, and not all the components are designed to do those bi-directional movement. So in order to be able in a MERB to take energy from a battery and get it back to the grid, there is a lot of things that needs to be considered before being able to do that.
Thank you. Leslie, I'm going to turn back to you for a minute. A lot of our participants on our webinars are often from municipalities in our outreach network. And one person has asked, what advice would you offer to municipalities facing utility capacity constraints that impact the type of EV parking provided? For example, in one development, the EV parking was downgraded from a level 2 to just a designated parking space due to grid capacity limitations.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah,
There's a
sure.
lot to
My
it.
sense is just, can you give a municipality advice if they're looking to try to install EV parking, maybe level 2, and are just having some pushback from their utility? Is there anything that you'd recommend that they do? Is it an issue that you have encountered or seen happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think just working really closely with the utility to look at some options on how additional capacity can be built, but then also looking at potential load management options as a way to help mitigate sort of the impacts on the grid are, I think, important kind of strategies that a municipality can try.
Thanks, Leslie. Trevor, back to you, and this is maybe a tough one for you to answer, but someone asked, well, if there is market demand recognized by companies like Hazelview, do we need provincial and federal policies where builders can respond to market signals, include EV charging in their designs as a differentiator for their products? So we'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective, like, what are you looking for from governments? What do you think, forward-looking developers are starting to do already? What would help them?
I would say if I am listening to my development team, they always like, long-term time horizon certainties. So any uncertainty, which we're seeing like outside of EVs, like you mentioned before with tariffs, nobody likes that in the development world. So if you're able to commit to, by 2030, for example, we want, 50% of all parking spaces for new developments to be equipped with EV level 2 charging. That's something us as developers and building owners, operators, we can work towards, right? So it's not something that's ever changing. It's something that's kind of written into hopefully the building code, because that's really the easiest way to do it. Either for Hazelview, which we might be, flatteringly called like a maybe forward-looking provider of rental housing, which is great. But maybe for building owners that maybe it's not their first item on their list of what they look for, including in like a sustainable development, right? So it is pushing those or kind of like the whole market towards just a more equitable and even playing field, so that if that the building was built in 2025 or 2030, at a minimum it should have X number of charging stations, so that it's less is it the best and the brightest in the development world doing it? No, at a minimum it's going to be this sub segment of the market. So
Thanks. Leslie, I might ask you sort of the opposite side of this, coming from government. Like, the City of Vancouver has been a real leader in EV uptake. Obviously, you're working with various developers across the city as you're thinking through some of your Clean Transportation Action Plan. Do you have a sense about what they're looking for from government, what you sort of have heard in interactions?
I mean, I think it's just that certainty of what will be required, right? So having clear guidelines on what is required. And I think I just wanted to touch a little bit on the previous question as well too. I think the government does play an important role, because there are going to be, I mean, just the challenges in the existing buildings and for residents to access charging. I know there's some discussion here around the right to charge legislation, and I think that's also an important component to enable, so that those who live in these apartment buildings can have a reasonable, attempt at accessing charging, and it's not just completely shot down just by the building owner or whoever. So I think those are important roles that the government can play.
Great. Another topic that I guess has come up in a couple of questions is just around fire risk and And so are there anything that is under consideration either in the building code around fire risk, or how would you, is there increased insurance requirements for EV owners in more buildings? So not sure if you've encountered, maybe I would kind of turn to the panel and ask if anyone has kind of had to engage with this as they're thinking through their planning for EV ready parking spots. I see you nodding, Marie-Pier. Did you want to take that one first?
Yeah, this is a question we often get asked by homeowner association. And if you look at studies, there is more fire with a gasoline car than there is with EV. So it speaks by itself. But when there's an EV on fire, it makes more noise though. So they talk about it more on the news. So that's one part. And then the other part is, I think, points to the importance of having an equipment that has the right certification. So what we noticed lately is if I get back to what I was talking about, like my EV EMS, there is like the monitoring, the analysis, and the control part. There is a lot of company out there who were more in the software world or like billing that saw an opportunity in MERB of doing energy management and now offer a service of analysis. So they're only doing software using like third-party equipment for the monitoring and for the control. And those systems right now are not certified. So there is a lot of risk right there if a non-certified system gets installed in a building, because it can, yes, create overload and a higher chance of fire. So I would say that for property owner and manager, I think the most important aspect is to make sure that when you put in place a system, that they have the appropriate certification on it.
Thanks. And Trevor, yeah, I saw you nodding as well. Go, please add your perspective.
Yeah, just you mentioned the insurance piece for the 25% of our properties where we do have EV chargers. We have not seen any of our insurance policies come back to say, okay, there's EV chargers installed now, you're uninsurable or your rates are going up a certain percentage. That does not happen. I think that's just a scare tactic that those that are against EVs like to maybe point to, and anything to do with like weight. And I think there's been some discussion outside of this chat, but I've heard it before on just like the weight of EVs and the possible, structural considerations in a parking garage that you might have to consider. But they're, in and around the same weight as some trucks, and those have been parking and using parking garages for many, many decades without issues. So again, I think it's just that people can be grasping at straws on things to complain about for EVs sometimes, and those are the easy scapegoats, as Marie-Pier alluded to. So there's been no real pushback from like a regulatory or insurance point of view that we've had to contend with, and no EV fires, which is great. But to your point, Marie-Pier, those do get a lot more traction in the news than gasoline powered vehicles. So.
Great. I think, it's really exciting to be watching this chat live. And I guess I would just touch on, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of them. I would touch on maybe a couple of topics we didn't have a chance to broach in case people want to speak to them in our final lightning round here. There's been some interest around like, how do we get more overnight charging rates and, really ensure utility companies are prioritizing giving EV owners the ability to charge cheaper overnight. I think there's been some questions around just like technical specs, like are parking spots going to be big enough? Or like, is it going to be easy to get EV chargers in for these pieces? And a few questions, I think, around, continuing discussion on this piece around, are we installing dumb chargers? Are they going to be ready for future changes? Like what's, going to be happening going forward with some of the systems that we're installing today? So, I would encourage people, it's been really exciting to watch the expertise even exchanged in the chat and some of these questions being answered in real time. But I'm just going to turn it to each of our presenters in our final 5 minutes. You get 1 minute to say, having heard all of this, if you got a magic wand tomorrow, what do you think needs to be changed? So what do you want governments to do? Developers, condo owners, utilities? I will call you in order here. And Joanna, you can go first. I'll cut you off if you go past a minute. Lightning round.
Okay, so I think I want to see a focus on new builds, right? I saw one of the comments in the chat about we've got a lot of existing buildings to address, and that's true. So we got to do that too. But I think it's easiest to make sure that we build the new condo and apartment buildings right from the start. It's cheapest to do it that way. You're not taking anything away from anyone or disrupting anyone's home. You're just making it sort of a default option. I want to see the year 2025 be the year that provinces start doing this. Quebec just announced draft regulations. It's the first province in the country that's requiring 100% EV readiness for multi-unit residential buildings. Manitoba signaled it might be, or it will be pursuing the same. I want to see Ontario and BC follow suit, and any other province that wants to jump on board. Let's do it.
Great. Trevor, you have probably an interesting perspective on this. What do you need from others in the ecosystem to be successful?
I would say to be successful to continue to see the rollout of EV chargers and capacity would be, I think, a bit of assistance from utilities and LDCs to say, okay, you know, what is your existing capacity at a building? And maybe that's like a no cost site visit to, you know, a prospective building owner that's, you know, maybe considering it and they don't really know where to start. I think that can be a large hurdle to kind of entry and participation, is just that initial, like, I have no idea where to start. Who do I talk to? And I think going to the utilities is they're typically unbiased. So they're not trying to sell you something, which is always nice. And also on the flip side, would like to see costs continue to come down, because at the end of the day, these chargers are just kind of, I mean, at present, not including the smart networked ones, which cost a little bit more, but by and large, they're just a 240 volt outlet, which is just controlled. So I do think there's a little bit of cost premium because it's new. It's kind of a flashy addition to you know, parking areas, and there's a little bit of cost premium, even though there doesn't need to be. So I do think if it's more accessible from the initial investment, because hey, if people are able to charge for 40 cents a liter, I think that gets people moving to EVs pretty quickly.
Wonderful. Marie-Pier, in your 1 minute, what are you going to do with your magic wand?
So Joanna took her magic wand for new building. I will do it for retrofit building. So I would say more grant like there is in BC, and where Quebec government will announce hopefully by the end of the day, and also lowering the vote threshold in a condo building in order not to have in some jurisdiction the need for 75% of the vote in order to get EV installed. So it's like in parallel of the right to charge. That's like more precise.
Thank you. And Leslie, you get to close us out today. What is your magic wand going to do?
All right, everyone's gotten their magic wands, which I totally agree with as well too. So I'll just add that, you know, I think what the BC government has built is a pretty strong foundation with the low carbon fuel standard and zero emissions vehicle act. So these pieces of legislation are really helping to bring more EVs and EV chargers to the province. And so I think it's really important that we, you know, stay the course on them, and then, you know, to also, in addition, for other levels of government to support that retrofit piece with more funding as well too. So those are my kind of wish list pieces.
Well, may I just say on behalf of all of our audience members, thank you so much for your time and your expertise to the panel. To the audience, thank you for being so engaged. Thank you for your questions. I really apologize if we were unable to get to yours. And yeah, really exciting to see the level of interest in this space, and obviously a lot of openings for our discussions next time. Wherever you are, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will be sending that follow-up email shortly. Take care.